So it's going now. It may pop out at any time if the internet's being... Okay. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm in Visual Studio. I'll zoom this a little bit because I want to show you a lot of menu stuff. Okay. So one of the first things I want to do is I am going to use, I'm looking for the Server Explorer. This part is not actually part of the assignment, but I just want to make a, so I can show you where the stored procedures are and stuff. And this is useful for, so you can see the arguments for the stored procedure if you want. Just right click on this. We've done this before. As I said, you'll get used to this screen should haunt you in your sleep after a while. And for the database name, I'm going to use the book review. As I said, most of the time I'll use the book review for examples and in the show tracker. But this is it's going to be really close, closer than I actually like to the two being the same. So I'm going to do OK. And that should give me, so there's the book review there, and I can open that up. So you know the tables and all that. So there are a couple of stored procedures there. And there's similar ones in the show tracker one. Notice it says USP new reviewer and USP reviewer login. These are stored procedures. I'll actually, I don't know if I can script them here. I might have to open up the Management Studio. Does anybody know what stored procedures are?
Are they like built-in functions, kind of?
Kind of. So what they're, you write SQL code. And it can, in the SQL code, you can do lots of different things, and you save it as a single executable file. So what this one, this new reviewer does, is it writes the reviewer to the reviewer table. It actually generates a password, a hashed password, from their plain password. And you know, it could insert into as many tables as needed, and this one is only one table. But, so these are parameters. These are the things that you have to pass to it. Like a function that has arguments, these are the arguments that have to go into the stored procedure. Not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to give everyone a value, but they all have to be there in the argument list. Does that make sense? Some are required. Like I think username is required, and email is required, and password is required, and last name. Actually, in this one, most of them are required. First name may not be. And one of the things I don't like about this view in Visual Studio is it doesn't tell you which ones are required. So I'm wondering, can I script this? No. So this is, again, purely for your information. I'm going to open up the Management Studio. Notice that Management Studio, you may not have seen that there, says that it is powered the SQL Server, which you really don't have to go into for this class.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to open the service, and when I changed the name, and now it's doing something odd. So I went to the website, WCF service, and I say, okay. That's
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. So,
and how did you get to the Management Studio?
so I have the bottom, but you could go like here and just type SQL. So if you just type SQL, the Management Studio is probably what will come on top. The Management Studio is a front end to SQL Server. Visual Studio also can behave as a front end to SQL Server. It just doesn't have all the functions. It's like PHP admin if you got MySQL. You know, it's not. Sometimes people are confused, and I said this in the blog too. They'll download the Management Studio and think they have SQL Server. They don't. The Management Studio is just a shell that talks to SQL Server. Anyway, so I have it. The only reason I'm opening this is not material to the assignment. It's just background information. Is I wanted to show you what this stored procedure looks like and what the result will be. So when I open up book review and I go down to programmability, stored procedures, they're the same stored procedures that we saw in the other one. I'm going to right click it. Again, this is purely for informational purposes. I am going to script it as create to a new query window. Okay. So notice these are the arguments that it requires. So username, first name, last name, email, password. And it declares a few variables. It checks to see if the user exists. Okay.
How did you script it? Sorry.
I right-clicked on it, and I said script stored procedure as, and I did create to new window.
So when I right click, all I'm getting is copy, refresh, and properties.
Right, because I'm not in Visual Studio.
Oh, you're in the name.
Yeah, and again, this is just for looks. This is just to show background information. This is what a stored procedure looks like. For those that want to do things like this, I do the SQL class twice a year. So basically what it's doing for us is it's going to do all the insert. It's going to create the passwords, right? So when you create a new user, so let me do, I'm just going to do a new query. I'm just going to do select star from reviewer. And you could do this part you could do in the Visual Studio. So it's going to insert first name, and it's going to take their email. It's going to generate a random number code. It'll take their plain password. I'm storing it here. In real life, you would never store their plain password. I'm storing it so that when we test this, we can go password after it's been hashed. Right? This is what actually should be in the database. I'm actually not be. Does that make sense? It's a hashed password. Does anybody know what a hash is? Not that it matters, because those procedures do it for you.
Isn't it just like where you take the password, just run through a bunch of different functions and get something?
Right. It sort of creates not a random, but a really complex scrambling.
Yeah, because it can't be random because you have to reverse it, right?
No, actually, hashes are not reversible. Encryption is, but hashes are one way. So what that means is that when we log in, that's the other part of this, we have to get their username, get the random seed that was generated, and reconcatenate it, rehash it, and see if the hash matches. Yeah, so hashes are supposed to be one way. That being said, some of the older hashes are now two-way because people have broken the the hashing formula. So this is a 512 byte hash. It's the one that's current and unbroken. That's, as I said, this is all, I'm doing this on the database side for a reason, for consistency. One of the things that I found is if you hash it in the program, so you're writing the C#, if you define your string slightly differently than somebody else defines the string, the hashes will be incompatible. It takes the exact definition of the string to hash, including spaces and things like that. So basically, by always doing it in the database with this, I can guarantee that the hashes will always be consistent and will match when you do the logins. Does that make sense? This is a pain in the butt sometimes, and it's still not that secure. If they get your password, and if say somehow this has to be stored in the database, this random number code, although in real life these numbers are usually much longer, a much bigger string of numbers. And what they do is they concatenate that with your password. They join them together so that you can't do what they call a dictionary attack. Dictionary attack is where you just go through the dictionary, you hash every word in the dictionary and see if it matches the hash that's there. And most people use real words, so there's a chance. It takes forever. I mean, again, this is fairly unbreakable at this point, although if you had a big enough computer and time enough, you could probably figure it out. You certainly could figure it out if you store their plain password. All right, so that's what's going on. So we got that one. I mean, if you're really, really curious, I could go into the details, but I just want to show you that they're existing. The other one is the reviewer login, and again, the reason I'm in the management studio is you can't do this in Visual Studio. I'm just going to script it again, create to a new query window. So this one takes in the username and the password, and then it declares some variables, and then it goes and gets the key code and the username and the hash, right? It actually doesn't get it concatenates their username from here. But it gets the hash and the key code, it rehashes everything, sees if they match. If they don't match, this is an important part, it will return a -1. Oh, okay?
Yeah, I mean,
so it'll return a -1. That's the sign that it was an invalid login. Okay, so all of this is just, I'm going to close the management studio. All of that was sort of. Using these is really easy. It may sound complicated. This stuff all looks complicated, but within the service that we're going to do, we just drag these onto the designer, and all we have to do is provide the parameters, and it's good. All right, so I'm going to not save my scripts, and I'm going to start a new website, same as always. File, new, website, C#, we'll make it an empty website. I will call this login register example, I guess. Any questions on that before and again, you can call it whatever. One thing that I've said before, and I'll say again, is generally if you want to move it, if you want it to work somewhere else, so that's the Server Explorer. Let me get up the Solution Explorer. You should do it right when you create it. That's the time to repath it, right, in that new website, because you can't move it while it's running. And you can't move it from within Visual Studio. If you want to move it, you have to go to the file system and move it. You can't move it from within Visual Studio. The save as doesn't move it. It doesn't change its path. It's like exporting part of it. You know, so you end up with a page that's no longer part of your project. So you basically, and if you think about it, because of the way it compiles and runs, it really can't move it. You know, it would be like taking it out from underneath itself, you know, when it was trying to run. So you basically, when you create it, also renaming is a pain because you can rename things and break everything. Now, if you know where, you can go in. There's a thing that's, if you right-click, there's a little smart tag and says rename all the instances of this to that, but it won't hit the XML files, and it won't change it in the HTML files. So those have to be changed by hand. It'll change it in all the C# code, but it won't change it in several of the other places where it's referred to. So that becomes a problem. The other thing that I just want to mention real quickly is that you can change the name here. Actually, it won't let you change the project name. But you can change the name of your things, but it doesn't change the internal name. It changes the file name only if you change it over here. So inside, you may change this. You might have class 1 that you made, and over here you change it to data class or something. So the file name is data class, but it's still just class 1 when you have to refer to it in code, unless you change it internally too. Does that make sense? The file management part of this can get complicated. If anybody done Android, it's worse. There are more files to keep track of. And more folders.
Why are we using an empty website instead of the WCF service?
So partially is because the WSCF service, if you start with that, tends to give you more stuff to work with that you have to undo. And I prefer to just do it rather than to have to go in and undo it. Now, it's nice in a way because especially if you don't have an idea of what you're going to do, it gives you basically templating code. It gives you, suggestions, but then you have to go and undo them. It's worse. The WCF isn't so bad as the like a website. If you go to a Windows Forms website or something like that, suddenly you have a massive style sheet already prepared for you. You have it gets, there's so much stuff they've done for you, and if you want anything at all unique, you have to undo it all. So to me, it's more of a hassle than it's worth for some of the templates, but certainly look at them. Some of them may be exactly what you want. I just think it's easier, particularly for learning, to start from an empty. So that's why we do it. I'm going to add, first of all, the ADO entity data model. It really doesn't matter whether you add the services first or the data model first, right? But you need the data model when you do the service to refer to, so I usually start with it. And I'm going to call it book review model, although, or maybe I should call it, well, book review model is okay. And I'm doing this as a new service. One of the problems with doing it this way, I think it makes logical sense to kind of break up your services into functionality. But because we're not hosting things in IIS, it means that ultimately when we're doing the final version of this, we may have 3 or 4 copies of Visual Studio running. So you could combine it all into one if you wanted.
I didn't see which one.
Oh, I just called it book review model. And again, the name of this doesn't matter a whole lot. Okay, then it tells me that I need to put it into a app code folder, and then starts the usual wizard. So for the first parts of this, okay, make sure that this is the right connection string. It's certainly not master guest that we want. If you did the connection that you might have a server 38 book review, and if it's there, you can use it. If it's not there, do a new connection. Do you guys need me to go through a new connection again?
So we just type server 38 and refresh.
Well, if it's there. If it's not in the list, you have to do a new connection.
Not on my list.
It's not so.
Oh,
SRB 38.
community says right. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, thank you.
And then make sure you choose book reviews. Did you do that?
Book review DBM.
Yep, that looks good.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
I'm not.
Okay. So if you don't have it, do new connection. So type SOB. Okay, so I'm going to go next. Generally, unless there's a reason, I always go with the most current framework. So I'm going to take a couple of tables, although I'm not sure we really need them. I'm going to take reviewer rather, and check-in log. The check-in log is just a log where everybody that logs in gets recorded. Reviewer is what we're going to insert into, and it's also what the login will use. Now, don't click next yet because we really need, this is the crucial part. We need the stored procedures. We need new reviewer and reviewer login. We don't really need FX hash password or get seed. Those are called by the new reviewer. And actually, they're called by reviewer login too. These are functions that are called. Yeah.
My stored procedures don't have FX get seed and
Me
FX
me neither.
Are you in the? You guys don't have those two?
No.
I think you do as a database. You might not have permissions.
Okay.
I was like,
We don't need them anyway. As long as the others work, and they should. It's weird. I think, all right, so I have admin privileges. Yeah.
It looks like the same, but I have SP underscore USB.
Possibly. What database are you in?
I just connected with my video.
we have, today we're working on roles of identification for ITC1725102016.
Oh, yeah.
If we were like working on what we're doing, the whole folder, it's like a sprint, it's a week sprint, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a week sprint, you know what I mean? Like, that's so little fun. But we can do more.
SP is usually like a system stored procedure.
So is that all we need and then we should hit finish?
That's all we need for this. Is basically we need the reviewer, the check-in log, USP new reviewer, and USP review login,
Do finish?
and then do finish.
So it's irrelevant if we don't have the two.
Right. I think the reasons why you don't have them is you don't have permission.
That makes sense. Yeah, but
So actually, this is one of the things we need to make sure, because I could go in and add permissions if I have to, make sure that it works.
When I tried to follow you in the studio, it didn't allow me to open up the function as a create. So
It may, yeah, so you probably don't have permissions on it. So again, these warnings, they're scary warnings. We should look up sometime what the dangers are. So we have just those two things. Did you get, so what you want? So you want the, yeah, you got it.
oh,
And again, if the permissions shouldn't matter because those things are called within the stored procedure, but we'll see. Now, the stored procedures don't show up on the chart, but they become methods that we can call. I could look at that if you want, but so we got the check-in log, we got the reviewer. It's at a different place. I'd have to look at where they are, but I do know that they become part of that. So one of the things I would do for the diagram is save it. When you get the security warnings again. When this ADO.entities first originated, the developers pretty well rejected it, but they've really modified it. Now, as I say, whenever you go online, they're using it. So if you get this, and I'm not entirely sure, just always say yes to all. Okay. So we have this. So what I want to do now is create the service. So I'm going to right click, add, and we'll do the WCF service. If it's not in, so I need that. If it's not in here, but mine is, you can always go to add new item. And I'm going to call this, I guess I'll just call it login service. And it should give us the interface, right? iLogin service. Question?
Oh, no, it's just one of those pop-ups.
Oh. So for now, we really have two things that we need. One is to register. And I'm going to call this, it's going to return an integer. Is it?
Are we removing the void do work?
Yes, yes, I did remove that. I think I'm going to make it a bool. I just want to say if it worked or not. Yeah. Oh, sure. As it is anyway.
I think this was fun.
I am going to pass in. Everything's in reviewer, right? We could do it either pass it in. I have reviewer light in my sample, but I'm curious if I just want to pass in reviewer. Let's try that. This is a little different than the sample. Rather than write our own class. Oops, this is the interface. No curly braces. So the second thing we want to do, and this one will return an int, is I'm going to call it reviewer login, and we will pass in the string username and string password, so the plain password. Okay. And that's all we're going to have for methods.
So the reviewer is it class?
It's a classic. Remember we drug the table onto the designer. So if I go to there's reviewer. So it made a class for a reviewer. And a reviewer, the way it treats it, one reviewer, a single reviewer is reviewer, and multiple reviewers are stored in reviewers. Does that make sense? So we do have the reviewer class. This is an experiment. We may have to create our own. I don't think we'd need to, though. Because there's nothing that we're going to add that isn't in the reviewer class. There's just parts of it we don't need to use. So are you guys okay with the interface? It's actually quite simple. It's simpler than what the examples I've had previously are, and I think it'll work. We're all right with that? Okay, so let's go to the login service. And again, if you do this, if you go mouse over, do the little light bulb, the smart tag, and it will say implement interface, and then we'll have it, and we can delete do work.
Click on that.
The other one's fine too. It just gives you more information. So I am going to, so we need to make our connection with the database, right? So this should be book review DB entities. It's always the name of the database plus the word entities. I'm just going to call it DB equals new book review DB entities. So that connects us to our ADO.NET entities classes. So we just need to connect there. So this returns a bool. So I'm going to do so I'll just say bool result. I'm going to assume true right now. And if you want to get rid of, I'll just say return result. Gets rid of the red lines, not that they matter at this point. So I am going to do int need a name for this. It returns a -1 if it fails. That's what they do if they fail. Result would make sense there. Int I have no idea. Anybody have a good name for that?
Pass.
Pass, that sounds good. Equals, all right, so we got DB dot, and we should be able to see USP, notice there's USP new reviewer. And when I do the parentheses, notice it gives me the list of the things that I have to put. And you have to put all of those. Just to warn you, for the show tracker, it's worse. There's a lot more fields, but they all have to be there. Right? So I can do, because we are taking in a reviewer R, I can do R dot reviewer R dot reviewer first name. R dot reviewer last name. I will, if I break this, so we got email and then password, right? So I'm going to break this right here. So I want R dot reviewer last name. No, so we got last name. Oh, it's up above there. Email. R dot email. The other thing is they have to go in the same order. So I need the plain password. And I think that's it. So I can break this to get it on screen. Nice thing about C#, line breaks are not that relevant. Okay.
It's not cynical.
Yeah, thank you. So we're just passing all these things to that stored procedure. And what we want to do is just see, that's all we have to do. Then the other thing we want to do is that basically I'm going to do a quick if statement. If, lowercase I, pass. So I guess what we'll say is if pass equal -1, I'll do curly braces for that. Result equals false. So that's just a test to make sure that it worked, right? And it gives us an answer, true or false, if it worked.
So the USP new reviewer return -1 or 1 of.
So weirdly, by default, it returns 0. All right, and then -1 is, I told it to return -1 if it failed.
So we need to look at the function procedure.
Yeah, you would need to. And in real life, what would happen if you have these kind of stored procedures in the database, which is really common, where you have lots of stored procedures in the database, the people, you would be the developer, they would give you essentially a database API. They would give you a list of the stored procedures, their names, the parameters that they take, and what they return, right? So they would give you that as a documentation so that you know what you're programming against if you were building this. So you wouldn't have to guess that the -1 is what it returns. Let's see if this works. So I am going to run this service.
Just the login or the I login?
No, use the login, not the iLogin. You'll get an error if you run it. Now notice it has all of these fields over here. And we have to give each of, well, not each of them, but a lot of them values. So plain password. So what is our person's name going to be? Because what I usually do is just their name and pass. Am I in there? So the date entered, I guess we'll just do that as, I think that actually is handled. Their email. First name. Now the hash pass it'll do for us, the key it'll get for us. It'll do that, but we need the last name. And the username, I'm going to just do sconger. And I'm going to try to invoke that. And I got a true. So let's see if it is indeed true. So notice how I entered values here. So one of the tricks is knowing which you need to enter and which you don't. Some of this stuff is going to be auto-generated. Generally, if you enter values there, it'll ignore them anyway if they're being generated in the stored procedure. This said it was true. You got false?
Yeah, we got full.
I don't know if you're in.
You know why you guys may have got false? Do a different name. Emails have to be unique. Usernames have to be unique.
So that name is gone.
That name is gone.
I thought about it. But I was like, no.
This is because we're all hitting the same database, right? And this is going to be an interesting thing in terms of, because we're all going to be hitting the same database. So yeah, change the name, give it some other name. I am going to stop mine right now. But it's actually good that you got false. That means it's working. So I'm going to go to the Server Explorer. And I'm going to go not to master, but to the login, to the tables. And I want to look at the reviewer. So why won't it let me? It's weird that it won't let me do show table data. I am stopped, right? So let's go to tools. I don't want to connect to the database, cancel. I just want to do a query. Should be everybody see like new query? Well, I want to give me a new query. I don't want to have to open up the Management Studio again. Where did? Yeah, so and I don't understand why. Normally there's an option here to do like a new query. Well, here's this. No, create a SQL, add connection. I don't want to do that. I want to create a new query, and it's not letting me. Should be under Tools. So if it isn't here, you guys don't have to do this, although I'm going to go back here rather than mess. I'm going back to the Management Studio. I just want to show you what it did. So actually, I see a lot of you got in there. So it entered that, and it also, if we go through here, it created the hashed passwords, and it got the date entered.
Is that the hash similar what GitHub uses? GitHub uses a hash number too, right?
Yeah, I don't know what it uses for a hash or how it.
Yeah, it's very similar to it.
They all look kind of alike. So it looks like most people got in. So there's lots of reviewers. All right, I'm not going to close this time. I'm just going to minimize it. All right, so it worked. Are there any questions about it? It's this easy though. It's just a matter of calling the stored procedure, passing it the values, and checking the result. That's all there is to it.
So the stored procedures were already.
They're already built into the database. Right. So let's do the login one. And this one's a little bit more complicated because what we want to return in this int is the key for the person. So we want to get their key, the key from the database. And we can use this in a session variable when we do the front end, so that we can limit it to, so they only see things that belong to them. And so you can write the key to a session variable and then store it, and you know whose session it is when they log in. So I tried to get the stored procedure to return the key, but it still returns 0 or -1. So I need to, we need to do a separate query to get the key. But we can test to see if if it's valid, and then if it is, then we can return the key. So I'm going to, we'll get rid of this. I'm going to do int, we'll just call it reviewer key. I'm going to say equals 0 right now. And then I am going to, I think, do a bool. Well, actually, it wouldn't be a bool, because it is going to be an int. This one, I'll call this one as int result equals db dot, and if we go down to the bottom, there's reviewer login. And it has two things. It needs the username, and it needs the password. All right, and it's getting them from here. So if this time we're going to do not equal -1. And we're going to do a query. Actually, no parens. So I'm going to go search for reviewers. I'm going to search reviewers. I'm going to get where r dot username, so reviewer username, equals username. So the username, this is why usernames are unique. All right, so username. And that, actually, let's do dot equals.
What's the difference?
So dot equals works better with strings. Equal will work in Visual Studio, but if you look at, I mean, with C#, but if you look at the documentation, they say that there are some permutations of strings that it might screw up on. Whereas equals, it really processes it as a string. In Java, this is the only way you can compare strings. All right, so and then we're going to select new. Can we just do select? Select new r dot reviewer key. There are ways to do this without a loop, but I'd have to look them up. So I'm going to do for each.
What's the significance of brackets there instead of parentheses?
Good question. I have no idea. It's the syntax that they developed. There's probably a logic to it. I mean, obviously, there's some reason why they did that. It's the syntax. I mean, I just learned that syntax. I'm not sure entirely why they came up with it, because I can't think of anything quite equivalent to it.
Well, I was thinking it might be a way to distinguish it as an object as opposed to a string, but that doesn't make any sense in this sentence.
No, because this is all, I mean, var, the reason why this is var is that there's all sorts of data types that can be returned for the individual fields, right? So this, you can't say this is a string because there could be integers and dates and things in there. And same reason you can't say it's a date or anything. You could possibly just say object. But because it's a container really for lots of different objects, basically, that's why it's a var. But I don't, there's probably, I might try to look that up. I can't think of an equivalent for this. You're setting off a block of the fields that you're returning. So it's a block. Usually these things mark the beginning and the end of a block. And maybe that's
Is it switching from SQL to kind of right there?
well, it's all SQL. This is just the select, but why it has to be select new, I'm not sure. So I don't know why I have to do it as new, and I'm not entirely sure why the curly brackets. It's an upside down SQL statement, right? But this is actually the way SQL is processed. If you write when you write an SQL statement, you do the select first, and then the from, and then the where. But the S underneath it figures out the from first because it needs to know what table it is. It gets the criteria next, and then it goes and selects the fields based on that criteria in that table. So this is actually the way an SQL statement is processed. It's just not, it's upside down from the way we usually write it. Not that that matters a whole lot, but if you know SQL, it might help.
It did help a little bit.
That's
what you just said.
So this loop, there is a way, and I'll have to look it up. You have to loop through something where you know it's only going to be a single value.
So why we are looking?
Because we need to, it doesn't know that it's a single value. So it makes you loop. Now there is something you can do, but I never have made it work. We could do first or default possibly. Wonder what happens if we do first or default. Let's see if I can do this without a loop, but we may have to do the loop anyway. It isn't going to allow that. Cast is redundant. Ah, it already sees it as a key, as an integer. Reviewer key. Did I spell it wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yes. I'm clear.
you see, now it makes me cast. It doesn't like the cast. I think these are the kinds of problems that I do. This is weird, but maybe this will work. ToString.
After close.
Oh, yes, it should. Thank you very much. No. So I'm curious if that works. So the reviewer key will either be 0, right, or it'll be a number that that we get. So let's see if this works. No guarantees. I've not done this before without the loop, but with the first or default. So I'm going to run it. Although before I do, does anybody remember what my username was?
Yes, Congress.
S. Conger, and then it was just Steve Pass, but with a capital S. Yeah. Case matters in the passwords.
Well, I didn't save it. I guess I saved it here.
So I'm going to do login. I'm going to try, so S. Conger. And I think it was Steve Pass with 2 caps, right? So I'm going to invoke. I'm going to do OK. And it crashed. It doesn't like that. What? So let me do the input string was not in the correct format.
format was
It's 7, so it actually is returning the right value.
I got the same error. So
Right, so why does it not like it? How is 7 not, oh, because it says reviewer key equals 7. It's a pair.
I got mine to work in something slightly different.
How'd you do it?
I said reviewer key equals key dot reviewer,
Oh, that actually makes sense.
and it returns, I don't know what my, when I put in the wrong password, it returns 0, and then
No, you're right. That actually makes sense. What did you got 0 and got nothing?
well, when I put in the right password, I got 11.
Oh, which should be about right. So that actually made what you did make perfect sense. Because the key is the container, right? So good job. Let me try this now. So I just did reviewer key equals key dot reviewer key. That should work. I was trying to figure out why it was having such trouble converting an int to an int. Because it wasn't an int, it was a pair, field pair value. So let's go up and run it again. It was returning the right number. I could tell that. It was returning 7. So when you're doing a test document, if you want, I could do a test document. There's a couple of things with, one of the things with the reviewer is, did it register or not, right? And you can test it if you do it with the same thing. We've already did this test, sort of. It fails because you can't enter the same person twice. Now with the reviewer login, so again, I'm going to do the S. Conger and Steve Pass. So here's, this one you might do a few tests on. One of them is, does it return the correct key? So it returned a key, it didn't return 0. So if you log in correctly, it returns the user key, right? What if I switch this, and I'm just going to do a lower those cases. So when I invoke it and do OK, I get a 0. Okay. So let's do, I mean, there's all the combinations you could try. So that's the correct user with an incorrect pass. Let's do an incorrect user with a correct pass. I'm just going to say that's Conger 2. Somebody did 2, right?
It's a new, your children or
Right. So there's 3 doesn't work. 2 might have worked if somebody, although it should have a different random number. Yeah.
For some reason, mine doesn't like the key dot reviewer keys. It's saying it's an anonymous type.
So let's see what we got. So reviewer key equals key dot reviewer key.
I got a 2 reviewer key right there. And I knew somebody.
Oh, first of all, this. So see how I changed this a little bit? I did a parentheses here and a parentheses here and then a dot, and I said first or default. And basically what that does is it returns the first value returned or the default value. I hadn't tried doing that in this context and made it work before. I think though, because I think I always tried to get it, I forgot to do key dot. There are ways to simplify it. It's nice not to have to loop when you're only returning one value. And this is actually the whole service, these 2 things, except doing it with show tracker. I will post this, of course. And I'll comment it a little bit, but interestingly, the client side of this is the one time when the client side will be harder than the service. Because in the client side, we're going to create the forms, and then we're going to validate the fields. And it's still not going to be hard, but there will be a whole lot more involved in the forms than in the service this time.
So what the key exactly contains?
So the key contains, let's go back to the database. So notice that S7 is S Conger. That is the, in the database, you know how relational databases work? So this is the primary key. So this primary key refers to this person always. And so when we put that into a session variable or something, and we query the person in the database that has a 7, we'll only get this person as their primary key.
I mean, why not the variable key has 7? Why we should do dot your key?
Oh, you mean in the code?
Yeah.
So one of the things, so the key actually contains this key. I thought you meant you were referring to the other key. This key actually contains not just 7. It actually contains reviewer. When I looked at the IntelliSense for key, it actually was containing reviewer equals 7. So the table name and then the value that we put out of it. So when it says that, that's not 7, right? So if we do inside of key, if we do the key.reviewer key, then it just returns the 7. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other questions on that? You can tell when I do these, so I still am exploring how some of these things work. And once again, food smells good. I'm going to let you get started on this or finishing up your other things. And we'll talk about we'll see where people are, but we can maybe talk about the clients as early as Thursday. We'll see. Okay.
So what database are we building?
So the assignment is using Show Tracker. And there are 2 stored procedures in Show Tracker. There's that are, let me show the Show Tracker ones. I guess I'll show it in the Management Studio real quickly. But you can see them in the, so I'm in there. Let's go down to Show Tracker. Let's go down to Programmability, Stored Procedures. Now, it's a little bit more complex in that there is a register venue and there's a venue login. Those are the 2 you want to do now. Notice there's also a fan login and a register fan. You can ignore those for now, right? That's your final project, is to do all the stuff that we've done, but do it for the fans. So the fan view of the database. So all you need is register venue and venue login. Now with the venue, register venue, I just want to show you real quickly. It has a lot more parameters, which is a bit of a pain. And you could actually probably use the, like I did, just use the venue. No, actually, I think you might have to create a venue data. Don't call it venue light or something, venue something data contract. Because this actually writes to 2 different tables. It's a little different than the reviewer. So the name, address, city, state, zip code, phone, email, web page, age restriction, all go to venue. And username and login password goes to venue login, which is an actual table. So if we look at the tables, there are actually two tables. There's venue, which is where they go, and then venue login, which is where the login information goes. So it's slightly more complex. So you know how we did a data contract before? I would make a data contract that has all of these fields in it, rather than do the straight venue like I did, or straight reviewer. And then all of these fields have to be passed to the the stored procedure. You necessarily have to provide values for each of those when you're doing the testing. Some things you can leave out, like I think age restriction, you have to put a number in there. It could be 0, but just because a blank space isn't an int, it could be 0. The username and password are required. I think the ones that say are ones that have to be put in. I mean, one of the problems is in the server. The Visual Studio doesn't tell you this. Is required, address is required, state and city are not, zip code is required, phone is required, age you do have to put a number in. Actually, there is a default on there. It might be all right. Username and password are required. I'll give you a shot at it. As I said, I think you might have to create a data contract. That's the only difference.
What were we looking at?
Yeah.
That's in programmability.
It's in, so yeah, so if we were to make inside Visual Studio, so we could make a new data connection. This is in the server window.
So we only need to include the venue tables in our database objects, right?
You know, I would include the venue table. I would include the venue login table.
Right, but not the show tables or the artist tables.
No, you don't need to include those. And so there's server 38, show tracker.
3, 1, we did just now and stuff.
So when I go up to the show tracker one down here, if you go down to program, so you go stored procedures here, you can see the stored procedures. And if you want to do like register venue, if you click that open, it shows you all of the, and you can do this from within Visual Studio. Right, so you can see them. What it doesn't tell you is if it's required. I mean, basically, your the store procedure does require that all these be there, but they don't necessarily all have to have a value when you run it. I wonder if I do a right click on like venue, city, properties. It doesn't tell me if it's required or not. It's a pain. In Visual Studio, it just doesn't tell you if they're required or not.
And our assignments are add-ons from the last assignment, right?
You could, so you can add these services to the last one if you want, or you can make a new service. Depends on how, if you want to keep it clean and separate. But you could add these to the existing service. The advantage of that would be that you wouldn't have to run as many copies of Visual Studio later. We are going to add some things, even if you make this separate. We are going to add a few things to it because we're going to do, the other thing we're going to add to this is register a show, add a new show.
Okay.
And that's a little more complicated. In this one, we'll add a book review, but in the other one, we'll add a new show. So I'll comment this real quickly. And then I'll post, and I'll kill the video now too. Is it still running? Looks like
Where
it
are we
is.
gonna have to add the data
in the interface.